Okay, I'm back. So I just did our introductory video, and I'm still sitting outside. Um, I'm actually currently visiting my boyfriend's family in Arizona, so this background won't be forever on this channel, but I thought I would enjoy it for now while I'm here in beautiful Arizona summer, and it was the perfect setup to read and finish The Imagined Life by Andrew Porter. Don't get mad at me that there isn't a book jacket on it, and it is stained. The book jacket was getting crumpled, it was shoved in my book bag, and that's not to say that I wasn't heavily anticipating reading this. And I've had the very unique experience of not only knowing Andrew Porter personally, since he was my fiction writing professor for 2 years at Trinity University. An excellent professor. If you have the opportunity to listen to any of his seminars, I guess, or lectures on writing and learning from him, highly recommend taking advantage of those opportunities. Anyway, I've been very excited to read this. But that was a very unique experience, and I also recorded a podcast with him and another of my professors and another fantastic writer, Kelly Gray Carlisle, on a tripod episode, all before ever even opening this book. So, and I went to his book release too. This is a signed copy. All before ever opening this book. And in addition, so many great reviews have come out since its release on April 15th this year, 2025. So many great reviews have come out. This book has been reviewed in the New York Times, Esquire, the Wall Street Journal, Texas Public Radio Podcast, Book Public, Tripod, of course, for the Trinity University Press, and Barnes & Noble's Poured Over have all done podcast episodes with him. So if you've heard anything about this book, it's probably from some of those big journals or maybe the podcasts. And all the hype is absolutely deserved. I had high expectations for this book, knowing him as my professor, and getting to hear a bit about his process and everything that went into this book, which you can also learn more about through Tripod and those other podcasts I mentioned. But all my expectations were exceeded. On the surface, The Imagined Life is about a son retracing the last few years of his father's life before he disappears. And he's been gone for, I think they say 40 years. He's been missing. So his son was around 12 years old when he went missing. And so it's about him kind of going back and retracing the last few years of his father's life. But the novel is about so much more than that, as most good novels are. And Porter's written other novels, but he's also a short story writer, and that is so apparent in this book, because all great short stories, as I have learned from his class, have that deeper meaning. There is that excellent, engaging story on the surface, but there's also so much to unpack as you go. And I'm so glad I had the opportunity to create this video based on this book, because it prompted me to take lots of notes, pages of notes on this book. And so I discovered this book is a lot more, it's about relationships, it's about grief and grieving, it's about self-discovery and other powerful themes like sex and sexuality. And it's all so masterfully done through excellent work on setting, characterization, and structure of the story. So I have so much I want to say about this, but I want to start this review talking about the setting and all the incredible work put into it, because you'll see in any of those other reviews from the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, such and such, everyone talks about how excellent the setting is, and it can't be understated. It takes place majority in Fullerton, California. I hope I'm saying that right. I've actually never been to California, but after reading this book, I feel like I have. A lot of this book is kind of road trip based, which is why I said my trip here to Arizona was perfect, because I road tripped here for a 14-hour drive from San Antonio, Texas, to be amongst family. So it kind of is just it was the perfect book to read. But he drives around a lot of California, and he just talks about, beyond the physical setting of California, it's also very much the time period, which is the early 80s. So much of the setting is established using music. He talks about his main character, Stephen, talks about discovering Stevie Nicks and Pink Floyd and Agent Orange even, which is a Fullerton, California-based punk band. And so much of the setting is cultivated through those, the 80s era pieces. And just a huge part of it is that his father is a professor and trying to get tenure at, I think it's St. Agnes is the name of the school in the book. And having to, you know, try to publish a book really helps you get accepted and yada yada, and like just kind of like how different the academic system was. Not that there isn't still so much pressure on professors today to be published, to write articles, to get blah blah blah. It was very based in like that time period, and talking about like even the opening of the book, you're just so surrounded by setting because it's like this young 11-year-old boy's perspective, which I will say his perspective is very mature. He is very perceptive and empathetic and hyper self-aware and aware of others, which is such a great lens to experience the opening scene through, which is a house party that his father and mother, Stephen's father and mother, are hosting. And there's many parties that they host. They have a pool, and you know, everyone's smoking weed and doing other substances and drinking and enjoying the pool, and his father enjoys old movies, so those are projected out in the backyard, and it just feels like that neighborly camaraderie that you kind of associate with, like, you know, like a John Hughes movie. Like those 80s vibes kind of come back to you. Even 16 Candles is referenced in the book, amongst other great films that were popular in the 80s. I was born in 2003, so I am commenting on this probably sounding maybe a bit ignorant. But again, I think the setting was so well developed that I felt I was really there with Stephen, which is critical to the rest of the narrative because Stephen does go through so much in his childhood. There will be probably some spoilers in this review just because I want to talk about the ending and I want to talk about the overall message of this story. So I don't want to, you know, if you're going to read it, which you absolutely should, I don't want to spoil anything for you. So now is your warning that I might say something that will spoil it for you. Because it's important that you're so connected to Stephen. Which kind of gets me into my other point of character dynamics throughout this story, because you understand Stephen so incredibly well by the end of the book. He, like I said, very perceptive, very empathetic, and you see him kind of absorbing his father's behavior, which his father's very social, his mother is like very welcoming, they're all very intelligent, a very intelligent, cultured family, and getting involved in academia at a young age and like seeing his father be a scholar and a researcher and that lover of like pop culture and learning and things like that. And his mother, it's mentioned that she's in Scrubs a lot, so I think it's like understood she's a nurse. That actually might be more explicitly stated, but she works at a hospital or a clinic of some kind. So also a very intelligent, hardworking woman. And I just have to say, like, I've never wanted a cigarette more than reading this book. Like, it felt like every few pages, like, the mom is smoking a cigarette, the dad is smoking a cigarette, like, somebody's smoking. But I think that is also, again, a testament to the setting of, I think it's Southern California, in the 80s, amongst professors. But those character dynamics, sorry, again, like, it's obvious I have so much to say about this book, just because I can't even stay on a single track of mind with this. It's just... Okay, the character dynamics. Stephen is a great leader through these dynamics. His dynamic to his mother is really, I would say, positive. Like, it's unique in the sense that, or I will say it's not unique in the sense that she is a protective motherly figure. Like, she's intelligent, she understands Stephen really well, and they're connected. But it's unique in the sense that she does really treat him like an adult. She's upfront about money struggles. She's as transparent as she can be about what his father is struggling with, what she's struggling with within their marriage, without being too bluntly honest like she might be to a colleague or another adult. But I think she's very aware of how perceptive Stephen is, and she's not going to neglect that and tell him to like shut that down. Like, she understands how much he sees, and she tries to work with that. which I think makes her character really compelling. But in the book, you also kind of get Stephen's older perspective, which is like the perspective you come with when he's following the last few years of his father's life in St. Agnes, and his colleagues, who are all aware of like eventually his father fails to get his tenure, and it's kind of rumored that there was some shady or fishy reasonings behind why he didn't get tenure. So the older Stephen goes and interviews and talks to his father's old colleagues to try and piece together who was on his side, who understood what happened, and what were these like secondary reasons to maybe him just not being a good candidate, which almost everyone who either was a friend or foe unanimously agrees that he was an excellent candidate for tenure, and he was super popular as a teacher. Everybody thought he was completely qualified. All of his journals, his writing, were in like scientific journals and very well reviewed. But I think the bigger part of this is the relationship between Stephen and his father. So Stephen's dad is a difficult character. You like him a lot. You aren't really given many reasons to dislike him, other than the fact that you know he's disappeared and he's kind of left the family for some reason. That's really your only inkling. And maybe that he's a bit irresponsible with what Stephen is involved in. I think where his mother includes Stephen in adult behavior because she respects him, his dad includes him in things maybe he shouldn't be included in as a 12-year-old or 11-year-old. Like when the family's too high to go get, snacks for munchies, like they'll have him bike to the gas station to like go get them Rocky Road ice cream. Which like isn't anything egregious, but I think it just goes to show that like Stephen was very aware of being high and the effect of drugs like at a very young age, but I think that's also like typical of the time. But his dad would also like, there'd be tension between like the mother and father, and he would kind of like take those moments to pull Stephen aside and like try and be manipulative by giving him gifts and things and such and such. And you're kind of become aware as a reader that he has a bit of a manic depressive sort of balance. He has moments where he'll give Stephen anything. He wants to take him to the movies, go on a road trip, blah, blah, blah. And then he'll have these other sides where he's completely distant, doesn't associate with the family, just deep dives into his work and writes these like paranoid letters to his English department and things like that. So you kind of see this two-sided relationship, as well as, and so many people have commented this about the book, is that because we see Stephen's childhood side and Stephen's adult side, you get that deeper message of, as children, we see our parents as in fragments. But ultimately we see them in a positive light as heroes, as idols. They know what they're doing. They're not immature. They don't make bad decisions. Or if they do, it's because they had the right reason. When we're kids, we don't see that they're also adults learning to be an adult for the first time. But as Stephen gets older, he starts to lean into like a level of acceptance to his father, which is what prompts him to go follow the last years of his father's life in the first place. I mean, he's been missing for 40 years and nobody's used a private investigator. Nobody's gone out to find him. Until Stephen, it's been 40 years and now he's like, okay, I think I want to revisit this. So that's an interesting dynamic as well, of the parallels between Stephen and his father. Stephen is separated from his wife, Allison, which you don't learn all that much about their relationship, but you know that it's a parallel between Stephen and his father, that they're both going through separations from their wives due to internal turmoil. And they both are in academia. Stephen is a writer wanting to teach and things like that. He has a young son, who's also very perceptive and very imaginative and things like that. So there's a lot of parallels between the two, and Stephen starts to understand that, and that his father wasn't perfect when he was a kid, because Stephen's not perfect as an adult. He's still learning things, still discovering what life is about for him. That's definitely a theme of that. Self-discovery is a big component of Stephen understanding that how his parents handled things, the issues that were going on in his life were probably not the best, but that they were young and they were trying to figure things out and do the best they could. This in particular, this theme is another thing I wanted to talk about, of like adults just being kids, learning how to adult, learning how to be mature and live their lives and gain meaning from their lives outside of just being a parent. Because myself as a reader, my parents are divorced, and Stevens are separated, and I was around the same age as Steven, so it was a really unique reading experience for me, because I'm 22. I've already unpacked that reasoning of like, okay, my parents were doing their best when I was 8 years old. Like, they were still learning. They're still adults going through things and experiencing losses and blah blah blah. They're trying their best. But as a kid, you're like, what the heck? Like, that was wrong, or you're upset, or you're angry, especially like through your teenage years, which Steven kind of mentions, like, he was growing up, he was really angry. And even now he still has some anger. And like that process of understanding, like, they were doing their best, or maybe they were sick. Like, Steven kind of uncovers that his father was dealing with a lot of mental illness, and what that might mean for him, and how that would have impacted his childhood. And I think that was a great message. I think as anybody, if you're a child of divorced parents, or you lost a parent, or a parent maybe decided to leave the family, I think this is such a great representation of that experience. And I think that leads into my particular interpretation of the title, The Imagined Life. Because I remember attending the book release for The Imagined Life, as well as on the podcast with Porter, talking about his interest in the subject of an imagined life, as in the lives that we picture ourselves having outside of our reality. When you daydream and you think, well, what would have happened if I had done this differently, or somebody else had done this differently in my life? Like, how would that have impacted me or changed me, and things like that. And I had a few other meanings I kind of took away outside of just like the lives we imagine ourselves having, as also like stories themselves and books themselves. Because there's a quote within the story, and I'm switching between my two notebooks to try and figure it out, but there's the quote in general is about books and stories somewhat, and Steven talks about separating from Allison, moving out of the house, and having to sort through all the books that they own collectively, which are his and which are hers, and that untwining of those characters from each other, of those collective like identities that Steven and Allison have as what they like to read. And I was thinking, well, stories really are imagined lives. When you're reading a book, especially a first-person book, you're like, I am that character. That isn't a life I am actively imagining. It could be like a complete fantasy where you're, I was reading, what's the new one? Onyx Storm, the newest Fourth Wing Dragon series, and you're like, you're a dragon rider. That's your imagined life. Like, that's real to you and you're immersed in that world. So that was like a kind of a very small subplot meaning to me of like, you create these lives for yourself and you can really immerse yourselves in them, and it's an imagined life. But there's also the lives that others imagine you to be living, right? So like my colleagues see me as the producer of the podcast, right? Like, I'm a communications major, I'm a student, or was a student. I'm an athlete, I like horses, like they know these, and you, like, people watching these videos, a certain life about me. You might think certain things based on your own opinions. And then I have my real life that I know I'm living, which is very different from that. So your imagined life for me might be very different from the life I'm living. And then to me, there was this other deeper meaning of the story, because Steven undergoes a lot of loss. Because for a large part of the book, he thinks his dad might have passed away. And dealing with that loss, that unconfirmed loss. He also finds out about the loss of a friend, and later down the years after they've kind of distanced themselves from each other, and the loss of his mother passes away, but that's stated pretty early on in the book. That's not a big spoiler. So he's dealing with these losses, and even the potential of moving away from California, the loss of a home, of a location, and the loss of a home through a marriage, the loss of a marriage through a separation. Those are all different kinds of losses. And we often think, when we lose somebody, we think about what maybe their life would have been like if they were still living. I know a lot of times, you're like, oh, this person would have been this old today. What would they have been doing if they were still that old? You have that imagined life of a loved one. Or in Stephen's case, the imagined life of somebody who's disappeared. There's kind of a point towards the end of the book where he thinks about what his life would have been like with his mother and father if his dad had never left, if he had stayed, what that would have been like, or if his dad hadn't gotten sick, suffering from his mental illnesses, if he was able to get help and maybe seek medication, what it would have done for him, how his life would have changed. And he feels a loss over the life his father could have had if he had maybe lived in a different time. And Stephen feels a loss that he is denied a life, as if his parents had stayed together, would he have had a different meaning out of life? Would he have stayed with Allison? Stuff like that. And I think that was a huge takeaway for me of thinking about the imagined lives of others in my life and how I picture them. And a matter of having perspective about people's lives, that the life I imagine somebody living might not be accurate, and you need to take a step back and think, I wonder what their real life is like. So that leads me to my main bigger takeaways from the book, which, one, that there's a difference between acceptance and forgiveness. You can accept that person for, like Stephen and his father. He accepts that his father was struggling with mental illness at a time when he couldn't seek medication, it wasn't okay, and his father was dealing with some personal identity conflicts that he impacted how he acted. And he accepted that of his father. He accepted that he put Stephen maybe in some uncomfortable positions because of all this internal turmoil. But there's a difference between accepting that happened and forgiving somebody for doing that, and not being angry that maybe they squandered a potential imagined life that they could have fulfilled, or that they abandoned a life that they could have fulfilled. So that was a big takeaway for me. But there's a difference between those two things. Not that I hadn't contemplated it before, but I think this book spells that out in a really, really interesting way that a lot of people can resonate with. And in addition to that, there's this seeking out of identity. You won't see somebody's real personality, their real life that they're living, unless they want to and feel comfortable showing it to you, and that you want to see it. Because all the signs, the writing can be on the wall, but if you're ignoring it and you don't want to see it, then you're not going to. Which is was a point that was made about Stephen, is that he took so long to decide to want to find his father. He didn't want to know who he really was, so he never did. He just took other people's word for it, or used his own biases and opinions because he was hurt and he was angry. And he accepted that, but he doesn't really forgive himself for not going to find his father earlier. Or maybe others don't really forgive him for that as well. So that was a big takeaway of if you really want to understand somebody, you have to show them that you want to know, that you're somebody they can show that to, and that you're still going to be able to see it. That you're not going to deny that part of them just because you don't want to accept it. So I thought that was great. Another takeaway is that you can grieve an imagined life, even if it's one that never came to fruition. You can grieve not having a nuclear family, or not getting to go to the school that you wanted to, and what your life might have been like. And those imagined lives, just because they're not concrete in reality, our perceptions are our reality. Our choices are our reality. So even an imagined life can suffer a true loss that deserves to be grieved. It's okay to let yourself be angry and sad over something that didn't happen, because it didn't happen. Or being angry and sad because something did happen that changed what could have happened. It's a lot of ifs, ands, and buts, but all of those things are still a part of us. Those contradictions in our lives and the potential in our lives, those all feel real to us. It's all part of our experience, and they deserve to have the value and the time to consider them. And I think this book really gave me the opportunity to think about that. I think I hadn't thought about that in a really long time, of what my life could have looked like if others in my life had made different decisions. There's just a tiny bit about addiction in this book. It's kind of a subplot of the story about drinking and smoking. And my family has had to deal with a lot of addiction issues. So as a reader, I found that really compelling to be like, wow, if my, family member hadn't decided to, or I shouldn't say decided to, if my family member hadn't been exposed to drinking or substances at such a young age, I would probably never have been impacted by it. Or maybe I still would have. And thinking about the lives and those experiences and the pain that it caused my family and what might have been different if it never happened is something that it was nice to go back and process that again and think about it differently through this lens, this fictional lens. And if you are listening to this and enjoying this review and you're thinking about those parts of your life, like, I think it's nice that you can take a moment and just be grateful for where you are now, but know that it could have been different, and be okay that maybe you wanted that to happen. Because I think it can inform how you act going forward and what parts of those imagined lives you'd like to see in your own life, because it's all possible. All these things are possible outcomes. So, not to get too deep into the meanings of this, but I went into this story with that surface level of like, oh, it's going to be kind of a mystery. Steven's going to go and he's going to find his dad, and he's going to see the real side of him that nobody else was able to discover. But it's so much more than that, and it's such a great story of self-discovery, but with a structure and a pacing and dialogue and characters that don't drown you in those emotional takeaways. It can be very lighthearted as a read, and it can be very heartwarming. So if you're looking for a new read, people are calling it like a great summer read, which is absolutely true. It is a road trip story in a lot of ways, but if you're also needing a catalyst to take the summer and reflect and plan your goals and think about the future, this is also a great book for that, because it shows you it's not always a linear path. And especially as somebody who just graduated, that was really affirming and reassuring. And yeah, and not to spoil too much, but it's also a great Pride Month read. So I hope you enjoyed this first review of The Imagined Life by Andrew Porter, and hopefully this YouTube channel for Tripod will have many more reviews to come. See you later.